My name is Emma and I'm 32. The band had just switched from the swelling strings of the keynote to something you could breathe in. Glasses chimed. An investor laughed too loudly. The chandeliers pressed meek halos onto everyone's hair. I could still taste the sawdust from the final sanding on my thumb. The way wood dust hangs on the air when a moment tries to convince you it's perfect. And then my father smiled. He stood center stage in the foyer of the hotel I had spent 6 months restoring by hand. To the legacy of heritage joinery, James announced, beaming at the crowd. And to the visionary who made this happen, my son Nathan. The applause was instant and polite. Nathan stepped up, collecting the Restoration of the Year award with a hand that had never held a chisel. I stood in the wings holding his champagne flute, my nails still dark with walnut stain. My father stepped down, passing me. He didn't thank me. He leaned in his voice, a cold whisper against the applause. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The applause for Nathan echoed in the grand hall, but my mind was already drifting back to the workshop. That was my sanctuary. A place of cedar shavings and quiet focus where the smell of oil and old wood was thicker than any perfume. While Nathan was getting his MBA and failing at 3 startups in a row, I was learning the temperament of 18th century mahogany. I knew how humidity could warp a joint by a millimeter, and I knew how to coax it back. My hands were callous maps of every project Heritage Joinery had ever completed. But tonight, looking at my father beaming at Nathan, I felt the old familiar ache. I'd treated my relationship with my father like a bad investment I couldn't walk away from. You know the feeling. You pour years of labor into something, sweat, time, loyalty, convincing yourself that if you just invest a little more it will finally pay out. That eventually, the ledger will balance and he'll see you. It's the gambler's fallacy of love. You think you're building equity, but you're just digging a deeper hole. I looked at my hands. They were strong, scarred, and capable. They had rebuilt staircases that history had forgotten. They had restored paneling that had seen empires fall, and yet in my father's eyes they were just tools. Useful but silent. Nathan was laughing now, accepting a handshake from a major investor. He didn't know the first thing about the wood he was standing on. He probably couldn't tell the difference between oak and veneer, but he had the suit. He had the smile, and apparently that was enough. I realized then that my dedication hadn't earned me a partnership. It had only earned me a permanent spot in the shadows. I was the engine room, unseen and greasy, keeping the luxury liner afloat so the captain could wave from the deck. And the worst part, I had let it happen. I had clocked in early and stayed late thinking my work would speak for itself. But in a world built on image, silence isn't dignity. It's invisibility. My father turned back to the crowd, raising his glass again. To family, he said. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I took a sip of the champagne I was still holding for my brother, and for the first time in 32 years, I didn't taste the promise of the future. I tasted the bitterness of a debt that would never be repaid. The investment had failed, and it was time to stop throwing good money after bad. I set the glass down on a passing tray and walked out of the gala, the sound of my own heels clicking on the marble floor, the only applause I needed. I didn't know it yet, but I had just taken the first step out of the workshop and into the war. The morning after the gala, the workshop smelled of cold coffee and impending change. James called a strategy meeting at 10 a.m. sharp. I walked in, expecting a post-mortem on the hotel project, maybe a discussion about the next contract. Instead, I found Nathan sitting at the head of the table wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. James stood by the whiteboard, a marker in his hand. Heritage Joinery is evolving, he announced, not meeting my eyes. We need to modernize. We need vision. That's why, effective immediately, I'm stepping back. Nathan is taking over as CEO. The room went silent. I looked at Nathan. He was smirking already, tapping away on his phone. Thanks, Dad, he said, barely looking up. We're going to streamline everything. Cut the dead weight. Focus on volume. Volume. In restoration, volume means shortcuts. It means using pine instead of mahogany. It means chemical strippers instead of hand sanding. It means ruining history for a quick buck. And Emma James continued, finally turning to me. You'll report to Nathan. He'll handle the big picture. You just keep doing what you do in the back. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Report to him, I asked, my voice steady. Dad, I run the operations. I manage the crews. I hold the certifications. Nathan doesn't know a dovetail from a dado joint. James sighed, the sound heavy with performative patience. See, this is why you're not ready, Emma. You're too emotional. You get bogged down in the details. You lack executive presence. Executive presence. Code for being a woman in work boots. Code for actually knowing how the work gets done, instead of just talking about it. I looked at my father, really looked at him. And suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. The glass cliff. He knew the company was in trouble. I'd seen the invoices piling up, the suppliers calling about late payments. He wasn't handing Nathan a kingdom. He was handing him a grenade. He was setting the golden child up to fail, knowing I would be there to catch the pieces, fix the mess, and save them both. I was the safety net he didn't have to pay for. I want equity, I said. If I'm staying, I want a partnership, a contract, 30%. Nathan laughed. A short, sharp bark. James shook his head, looking disappointed. Always about money with you, isn't it? Fine. We'll give you a seniority raise. $3. The price of a cheap coffee. The valuation of my life's work. Take it or leave it, Nathan said, leaning back in the leather chair that was now his. Honestly, we could hire 2 apprentices for what we pay you. I looked at them both. The father who used me, the brother who dismissed me, and I realized the cage door was open. They thought they were locking me in, but they had just handed me the key. Okay, I said. I'll think about it. I walked out of the meeting, went to my car, and drove to the far end of the parking lot. I stared at the workshop I had built from the ground up. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just did the math. $3 an hour. That was the severance package for my loyalty. And it was an offer I was going to decline. I didn't go back to the office to argue. I didn't go back to negotiate. I went back to type. My resignation letter wasn't a manifesto. It wasn't a list of grievances or a plea for understanding. It was 3 sentences. 2 weeks' notice. An offer to transition current files. A signature. It was cold, professional, and final. I walked into James's office and placed the paper on his desk right on top of the blueprints he was pretending to review. He glanced at it, read it, and then chuckled. It was a dry, dismissive sound that scraped against my nerves. Is this a tantrum, Emma? He asked, tossing the paper back at me. Because honestly, I don't have time for the drama. You want me to chase you? Fine. I'm chasing you. Now get back to work. It's not a tantrum, I said, my voice flat. It's a notice. I'm leaving on the 15th. He leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. The arrogance radiating off him was almost impressive. Okay. Go. See what's out there. You'll find out pretty quickly that no other firm is going to tolerate your obsession with perfection. You take 3 times as long as anyone else because you have to sand the underside of a table nobody sees. You'll be back in a month begging for your bench back. I didn't correct him. I didn't tell him that my obsession was the reason our clients paid premium rates. I just nodded. Maybe you're right, I lied. But I'm going to try. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in malicious compliance. I didn't sabotage a single thing. In fact, I worked harder. I finished the punch list for the hotel lobby with absolute precision. I labeled every file. I organized the supply closet. I made sure that when I left, there would be no excuse, no loose end they could point to and say, she left us in a lurch. But while I was finishing the work, I was also liquidating the asset. Every evening after the crew had gone home, I packed. People forget that in high-end restoration, the company doesn't own the magic, the artisan does, and the artisan owns the tools. I opened my personal chest. I took out my Lie-Nielsen block planes, the ones I had bought with my first big bonus years ago. I took out the set of Japanese chisels, hand-forged and razor-sharp, that I used for joinery so tight it held water. I packed my moisture meters, my specialized calipers, my granddad's marking gauge. I stripped the workshop of its capability. To the untrained eye, to Nathan's eye, the shop still looked full. There were saws and drills and hammers. But the soul of the operation was going into cardboard boxes in the trunk of my car. I was removing the capacity to do the work they sold. On my last day, Nathan walked by while I was carrying the final box out. He was drinking a cold brew, looking at his phone. Cleaning out the junk, he asked, not even looking at the box. Something like that, I said. He didn't notice that the rack behind me, usually gleaming with high-carbon steel, was now just a row of empty pegs. He didn't know that, without those specific tools, the contract for the Victorian Library restoration starting next week was physically impossible to fulfill. He thought wood was just wood. I put the box in my car and closed the trunk. The sound was a heavy thud, like a gavel coming down. I looked back at the building one last time. James was in his office, probably planning his next speech about legacy. Nathan was in the break room. I got in the driver's seat. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel afraid. I felt lighter. I checked my rearview mirror, put the car in drive, and pulled away. They thought I was the help. They were about to find out I was the engine. And the engine just walked out the door. My phone buzzed as I pulled onto the highway. It was Christian, the client rep for the hotel group. I answered on the second ring. "Emma, it's Christian. Nathan just called me." His voice was tight, bordering on panicked. "He said you're taking a sabbatical. He said the Victorian Library project is being pushed back 3 weeks." "I'm not on sabbatical, Christian," I said, merging into the fast lane. I resigned. Silence. Long, heavy silence. "Resigned, Emma. The only reason we signed that contract was because you were led. Nathan. Nathan thinks varnish is a brand name." "I know. I'm sorry. But I couldn't stay." "Where are you going?" "Nowhere yet. I'm taking some time to figure out my next move." "Don't figure anything out," Christian said quickly. "Meet me at the Monarch in an hour. Bring your portfolio." I met him. But he wasn't alone. Sitting next to him was a man I recognized from industry magazines. Robert, the CEO of Global Heritage, a firm that restored castles in Europe and monuments in D.C. "Christian tells me you're the one who saved the paneling in the grand ballroom," Robert said, skipping the pleasantries. He was looking at photos of my work on Christian's tablet. "I didn't save it," I corrected him. "I rebuilt the substrate so it could save itself." Robert looked up, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Exactly. That's the difference between a contractor and an artisan." He pushed a folder across the table. "We're opening a new division. Heritage Bespoke. High-end historical restoration. We need a partner, not an employee, a partner. 40% equity, full creative control." I looked at the contract. The salary was triple what James paid me. The benefits were comprehensive. But it was the title that made my breath hitch. Chief Restoration Officer and Managing Partner. "Why?" I asked. "Because we know who did the work," Robert said simply. "We've been tracking James's firm for years. Every time a project came in under budget and over quality, your name was on the sign-off. Every time there was a disaster, it was Nathan's. We don't want the brand, Emma. We want the hands." I signed the contract on the hood of my truck in the parking lot. The metal was warm under my palm. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for a seat at the table. I was building my own. Meanwhile, back at Heritage Joinery, the collapse had already begun. My phone started blowing up 3 days later. It started with texts from the crew. "Nathan ordered the wrong stripper. It ate through the veneer on the bar. Client is screaming. Where is the MSDS for the solvents? We can't find the moisture meters. Did you take them?" I didn't answer. I sat in my new office, a space with natural light, ergonomic chairs, and a team of apprentices who looked at me with respect, not dismissal. I deleted the texts. Then the emails started. Christian had officially fired Heritage Joinery from the library project, citing breach of talent clause. The cancellation fee was $50,000. Then came the voicemail from James. "You ungrateful little brat, you sabotaged us. The chemicals Nathan used turned the wood gray. You didn't leave instructions. Fix this or I swear to God." I listened to it once. His voice cracked with panic at the end. The anger wasn't real anger anymore. It was fear. He wasn't mad that I left. He was mad that the curtain had been pulled back and the audience was finally seeing that the wizard was just a small, incompetent man. I didn't feel guilty. I felt vindicated. The chaos wasn't my doing. It was the natural result of removing the foundation from a house of cards. I hadn't burned the place down. I had just walked out with the fire extinguisher, and now they were finally feeling the heat. You would think the end of a 30-year legacy would sound like an explosion, a crash, something loud and dramatic. But the death of Heritage Joinery didn't come with a bang. It came with a certified letter and a CC'd email from the state licensing board. It happened on a Tuesday. I was reviewing blueprints for the new artisan division when Christian forwarded me the notification. The subject line was dull. Notice of non-compliance and immediate suspension of operations. Here's the thing about high-end restoration that my father and Nathan never bothered to understand. You cannot just pick up a hammer and claim you can fix a 200-year-old landmark. It requires a master artisan certification. It is a specialized, difficult license to obtain. It requires thousands of hours of documented work, written exams, and peer review. For the last 5 years, Heritage Joinery had bid on every historical contract using license number 4092. My license. James had assumed the certification belonged to the company. He assumed that because he paid for the insurance and the bonding, the credentials were part of the furniture. But a master certification attaches to the individual, not the entity. When I walked out the door with my tools, the license walked out with me. The audit was triggered by Nathan's chemical disaster at the library. When he stripped the veneer off the antique bar, the client filed a damage claim. The insurance adjuster asked for the master on record to explain the methodology. They looked for me. I wasn't there. The state board realized that for 3 weeks, Heritage Joinery had been performing restricted historical work without a licensed supervisor on site. That isn't just a breach of contract, it is fraud. The fallout was instant and catastrophic. Every active contract, the Victorian Library, the courthouse renovation, the museum wing, was immediately voided. The state issued a stop work order. They weren't just losing clients anymore. They were legally prohibited from touching a piece of wood in the state of Virginia. My phone rang. It was James. I didn't let it go to voicemail this time. I wanted to hear it. "You reported us," he screamed. There was no preamble. No hello. Just the raw, high-pitched sound of a man watching his world burn. "You called the board, you vindictive, ungrateful traitor." "I didn't call anyone, Dad," I said. My voice was calm. It felt like cool water against his fire. "The adjuster called me. They asked why the master of record allowed acetone on 18th century veneer. I told them the truth. I told them I resigned 3 weeks ago. You sabotaged the license. You took it with you." "I earned it," I corrected him. "It has my name on it. It requires my oversight. Did you really think you could just keep using my credentials after I left? Did you even read the state statutes?" Silence. The heavy, suffocating silence of ignorance exposed. "You never read the paperwork, did you?" I asked, and the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. He didn't know, he truly didn't know, that I was the only thing making his business legal. He had been so busy playing the visionary, so busy grooming Nathan for a throne, he didn't understand that he never checked the foundation the throne sat on. "Fix this," he choked out. It was a command that sounded like a beg. "Call them. Tell them you're still consulting. Tell them it was a paperwork error. If you don't, they're fining us $10,000 a day. They're pulling the bond, Emma. They're going to bankrupt us." "I can't fix it, Dad," I said. "I can't lie to the state board. That would cost me my license. And unlike you, I value my work. We are your family." "And that was my license," I said. "You should have checked the expiration date on my loyalty." I hung up. I sat in my ergonomic chair looking out at the city skyline. I thought I would feel guilty. I thought the daughter in me would want to run back and save him from the fire, but the artisan in me just looked at the wreckage and nodded. This wasn't sabotage, it was structural failure. He had built his entire empire on a load-bearing wall he treated like decoration, and when he removed it, gravity did exactly what gravity always does. It brought the whole thing down. The confrontation didn't happen in a dusty workshop or a crowded family living room. It happened in my new office enclosed in glass overlooking the city that Robert and I were now reshaping. My assistant buzzed me. "There are 2 men here to see you. They don't have an appointment, but they say they're family." "Send them in," I said. I didn't stand up. I didn't adjust my blazer. I just waited. When James and Nathan walked in, the first thing I noticed was the dust. Not sawdust, the clean, aromatic dust of fresh work. This was the gray, stale dust of a shop that had been shut down. James looked 10 years older. His suit was wrinkled. Nathan looked like a child who had lost his mother in a supermarket. They stood awkwardly in front of my desk. I didn't offer them a seat. "We need to talk," James said. His voice lacked the booming authority I had grown up with. It was thin, reedy. "I'm listening," I said. I didn't look up from the blueprint I was marking. "The board. They shut us down," Nathan blurted out. "They fined us $200,000. We lost the bond." "I know," I said, making a small correction to a cornice detail on the paper. "We can fix this," James said, stepping forward. He put his hands on my desk, leaning in. We've been talking. We're willing to restructure. We'll make you a partner. 40%. You bring your license back, we reopen under a new LLC, and we split the profits. I finally looked up. I looked at my father, really looked at him. I saw the desperation in his eyes, the fear. But I also saw the calculation. Even now, standing in the ruins of his own making, he was trying to negotiate a deal where he still won. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a bailout. 40% of what I asked. 40% of zero is zero. Your reputation is gone. Your contracts are void. Your bond is pulled. You don't have a company to offer me, Dad. You have a liability. We are your family, Nathan shouted, his face flushing red. You're just going to let us starve. You're going to let everything Dad built disappear because you're petty. I'm not petty, I said. I'm professional. I stood up and walked around the desk. I didn't yell. I didn't list my grievances. I didn't tell them about the years of being overlooked, the insults, the glass cliff. I realized then that explaining my pain to them was like trying to explain color to the blind. They lacked the capacity to understand. You built a company on my back, I said, my voice quiet but filling the room. You took my labor, my skill, and my name, and you treated it like it was yours to give away. You thought I was a tool you could put back in the box when you were done. But tools don't have licenses, and tools don't have memories. Emma, please, James whispered. I'm your father. And I'm a master artisan, I said. And I don't work with amateurs. I checked my watch. I have a meeting in 5 minutes. You need to leave. James opened his mouth to argue, to beg, to scream. But he looked at my face, calm, cold, resolute, and he stopped. He saw the truth. The daughter who sought his approval was gone. The woman standing in front of him was a stranger who happened to share his last name. He turned and walked out. Nathan followed, casting one last hateful, terrified look over his shoulder. I watched them go. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel a wave of grief. I felt clean. It was the feeling of sanding a rough board down to the smooth, true grain. The noise was gone. The friction was gone. I sat back down at my drafting table. I picked up my pencil. I looked at the blank space on the paper where a new foundation was meant to be. And for the first time in my life, I began to draw a future that belonged only to me. If you've ever had to walk away to find your worth, share this story.